Hey guys, welcome to SheKnowsArsenal. My name is Jessica. I'm your host. You can follow me on Twitter at JessinoTweets and at SheKnowsArsenal. Welcome to the match review. We're going to be going over just kind of what happened in Arsenal's game yesterday against Chelsea. So make sure you guys like this video, subscribe to the channel. I know it's an odd time for me to go live, but like I told you guys yesterday, I'm going to be traveling today. So I knew I wasn't going to get an opportunity to do it in the afternoon. And so I wanted to make sure that I at least popped on and chit-chatted with you guys for 45 minutes or so about the game. So make sure, like I said, you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and get into the chat and let me know what you're thinking. So before the game, obviously, like the mood was definitely down. My mood was down. I think when, serving the chat, the mood was definitely down. And I think that mood was 100% justified based on the last 4 games. And I was very honest about feeling like we had thrown the league title away, and from now we're just kind of fighting to like save face and stay close just in case something happens, but it's unlikely because it's Man City. And my entire mood on the team would kind of change if we were able to win a game, just because I know that there's signs of life. That's all I was really looking for, was signs of life, that we weren't just going to be on the beach and not think about the rest of the season and just kind of like do whatever. So I was a little bit worried about the Chelsea game, just because, not because Chelsea are good, but because you can lose to anybody if you're not on it. You know what I mean? And so I was happy to see signs of life yesterday from Arsenal. 100%. I was, just excited to see that the press was back, the energy was back. We were scoring goals, we looked fresh, we looked like we were playing with freedom. And that's all I really wanted to see, because quite frankly, like, we have to hope that something bad happens with Manchester City, and the likelihood of that is not high. So from here on out, we just want to see the team actually just try to stay close and stuff like that. And I think they made a good account of themselves yesterday, especially in the first half. I was shocked at the changes that Mikel Arteta made, because I felt like some of them came a little bit too late. And the Kiwior, decision for me, I feel conflicted by it, because one, I feel justified and, not, slandering Kiwior for not being perfect in his first 90 minutes of play for Arsenal, and sticking with the feeling that he's a quality player and will probably be fine if he just played decent minutes. But I also feel like that could have backfired a little bit on Mikel Arteta, because seeing the way Kiwior played, beyond, like, I get it's Chelsea and they're not the best team right now, but he was passing with his left, his right. He was defending front-footed. We were able to squeeze the pitch again. We were able to press again. We were up on the halfway line. We weren't dropping off, and we could play our game. And so, although it would have been a strange choice maybe to just come out of the bag with Kiwior and Gabriel playing at the back, I do think that it shows that Arteta did have choices to make, and he didn't necessarily use the choices that he had in order to make sure that Holding wasn't playing significant minutes in the run-in. The thing about Kiwior is that before the game and for a couple of weeks, people were saying that he was crap. He wasn't a good player. Maybe he needs a loan. He was a waste of money. He was this and that. And I've been very vocal about, Arsenal fans have been gaslit into thinking that the players that are on our bench are no good, and yesterday was a really good example of that. The reality is that, like, Holding can't start for anybody in the Premier League. He does not start for a single Premier League team at all. So basically we have maybe a squad player at best, Premier League squad player, maybe a championship level player that's starting games for Arsenal Football Club at Anfield, at West Ham, at home to Southampton, and then at the Etihad. That's just, there's no way that Kiwior, a player that started for Poland in the World Cup, who's highly, touted as one of the best up-and-coming Polish center backs, is going to be anywhere near worse than Rob Holding. And so I'm happy to see that he played well, and he's now a very viable option moving forward. I'm a little bit disappointed that we didn't opt to use that choice earlier, because it just seemed obvious not to play Rob Holding for any reason whatsoever. Like, and I know that that sounds harsh on Rob Holding, but the truth of it is he's just not good enough, and that's just the truth, But from minute one, Arsenal were on it again. Like, we were on them. We were playing our game. I thought Jesus was really good. He got a goal. Odegaard with 2 goals, a player that's, I think, been massively criticized. I think people have went too far with it as well. Like, Odegaard has 14 goals this season. He has 22 goal involvements, and I agree with the criticism of him in big games, and sometimes he does go missing. But the idea that Odegaard shouldn't be captain, he shouldn't be playing for Arsenal, he's not good enough, he's crap, he's blah blah blah, like, none of those things are true. And really, when you look at the numbers from Martinelli, Saka, and Odegaard, you really have to look at them and say, they may not have perfect games all the time, but like, they can never be called crap, shit, not stepping up, not doing this, because it's like they've been carrying, like, you know what I mean? So in that first half, like, we were just scintillating. It was just typical Arsenal football. Like, Trossard, I thought, was quite good, even though, like, he didn't get on the score sheet. He looked fresh. He looked like he was ready to fight for a spot. And before the game, remember, we had kind of talked about Martinelli being unlucky not to start. And I still feel that way, because Trossard was good. Jesus was good. Martinelli's probably our most informed player. And it seems like Saka is kind of out of form at the minute. He's been out of form for the last couple of games. And maybe we should figure out a way to play Jesus, Trossard, and Martinelli together, because they're the most informed at the minute. I know that Saka can come alive at any point in time, but even in this game against Chelsea, he just couldn't get going. Like, he just wasn't like his usual self. And I don't know if he just needs a mental and physical break. He's somebody that plays every single minute for Arsenal, basically, and he just needs a little bit of time off, but ahead of Newcastle, if you had to choose a front three, it might not include Bukayo Saka at the minute. So that's a big decision that Mikel Arteta needs to make. And then, again, with Odegaard, he scored the 2 goals. I was really happy for him. He's a player that definitely needs to figure out how to become more prominent and more dominant in big games. And, Newcastle is a good time to try to turn that around. But the 2 goals that he scored, they were class. You could see that. I think that he took some of the criticism personally, which I love. And so, yeah, like, the game was very enjoyable, especially in the first half. The changes that were made definitely helped. Jorginho coming in for Thomas Partey was a good call. I think Jorginho's been used. He's been underused. Trossard and Jorginho have been underused when they've played. For the most part, they've been good, and they offer something different than the players that we have. And they're not the types of players that are scared, to play. Like, they seem like they've been there and done it before. I mean, Trossard is not a kid, and Jorginho's literally been there and done it before. So it was nice to see him have a really good game and look composed and just do Jorginho things. Because, quite frankly, when Thomas Partey came on the pitch, he looked just as bad as he's been looking in the last couple of games. So, again, Arteta has some big decisions to make ahead of a really important game against Newcastle. Lucas says Kiwior was on one of the best prospects in Serie A, Milan, Juve, West Ham, Borussia Dortmund, Leipzig wanted him. He was compared to Skriniar and Laporte. And Arteta said, like, when he first signed him, that, like, he would change the way that we played from the back, and he believes that he can be great. And so a player like that, for me, is not somebody that off of the back of, like, 90 minutes against Sporting, a couple of minutes at Anfield, I'm just going to write him off and say he's no good. We don't tend to be very patient and are trigger happy to call a player shit when they're not. You need to give them a little bit of time. And I think Kiwior was probably, one of the best players out there yesterday. He really made a good account of himself, which is nice. Lucas says Saka was good in the first half, in my opinion. The problem is that he is not effective after the 60th, 70th minute. I found that, like, Chelsea when they did have some sort of joy, which was very limited, especially in the first half, a lot of it was coming off of Ben White and Saka's side. And Saka didn't track his runner several times. And so I think that's something that he needs to do. Like, he needs to be tracking his runner. He wasn't like horrendous, but we know when Saka's good, we know what he looks like. Like, he's in flow. And right now, he's not really looking like that Saka. And so, when you have three other players that are in form, Jesus, Martinelli, and Trossard, you have to make the right decision. And I don't think Arteta will drop Saka for Newcastle, but those are the big decisions that you live and die by. You know what I mean? So we'll see what happens with that. Mashego says Holding will be back. I don't see Gabriel playing this weekend. I mean, I'm apprehensive to say that Gabriel won't play just based on the fact that, like Arteta said, he's a doubt. He also said Trossard was a doubt and he came into the team. The only player that we've seen that they've kind of maybe not been like, it's been weird on the way that they're reporting the injury is Saliba. But, obviously if he comes off with an injury, Arteta is going to right after the game say he's a doubt. But I wouldn't be surprised if he played. A bandaged up Gabriel for me is better than Holding, so I could definitely see him playing. But, we have to remember that we've had several players that were doubts before a game that still played. This is too important of a game, I think, to risk it with Holding. So it really depends on if he can kind of be bandaged up a little bit. Techno Bix says Gabriel will play on one leg if he needs to at the weekend. I think you could kind of see that, like, Gabriel is somebody that, like, knows that he's so important, so he knew he didn't want to go down. And some people were upset that Arteta and the team didn't, like, take him off, but I'm sure he looked to his left and saw Holding warming up and was like, shit, I need to be fit. So I appreciate him wanting to continue on, and I do think that we have to figure out a way to get him fit for Newcastle. But I think that he will play, to be honest. Kaiga says, are you concerned with the second half performance? Not really. I mean, it's a typical Arsenal performance of the season. I feel like the way that we've played, once we've gotten a couple of goals up, we tend not to be as ruthless as we probably should. That game should have been 5 or 6-0 rather than 3-1. And, Zinchenko tends to switch off and, not be as, ready to go after like the 65th, 70th minute. And so I think that it should almost be like an automatic sub. If we're up 2-3-0, in a game, take Zinchenko off. Like, we usually do concede that goal around the 65th, 70th minute on Zinchenko's side. Like, take him off and bring on Tierney, get on fresh legs, because as soon as Tierney came on, I thought that we looked a lot more solid. Like, we looked a little bit more like, awake. Obviously we had to make more changes because, we had to bring in Holding and, Thomas Partey came on and we made changes. So things kind of weren't as smooth, but I do think that there's a little bit of an overemphasis on the second half. It happens. Like, sometimes when you're up 3-0, you just need to manage the game, right? And so, yes, I think Arsenal could be more clinical and, like, get up 5-6-0, and I think that's the next step for this Arsenal team. But, like, the reality is, like, people are acting like, oh my gosh, like, we really, like, who we are is that what that second half is. Like, most teams, when they get up 3-0, which the game was over at that point, take the foot off the gas and manage it. Had we, as Zinchenko had not given up that goal or, like, not, switched off in that moment and we had won 3-0, I really don't think people will be complaining. Like, we don't, at 3-0, you shouldn't need 4, 5, 6. You really shouldn't, so I think people are overemphasizing that second half as like some sort of like, oh my gosh, like, we're so terrible that second half. Like, had Zinchenko is not a great defender, take him off at 65, 70 minutes. We didn't need him at that point. Bring on Tierney. That doesn't happen. And we go with 3-0. And there's nothing wrong with 3-0 against your London rivals at home. There's nothing wrong with it. High Tech Jace, we already kind of talked about Kiwior. He was never a crap player. People went too far off of the back of like one performance. Like, it's just, he was really good. And so, and regardless if he's like the best player in the world or not, he's better than Holding, so he should be playing. Lucas says Zinchenko was involved in the first 2 goals overall play, but those mistakes leading to goals are so frustrating. They are. And Arsenal are one of I think, the leading teams in individual errors that lead to shots and goals. And so some of that comes from being in possession. Like even Ramsdale, there was a moment where he just easily could have just kicked the ball, like make the right decision. And he put us under pressure and just like passed it straight to a Chelsea player. Like if they were better, we may have gotten punished. Do you know what I mean? And so I think that like the way that we play is high risk, high reward, but also like the mistakes need to be cut out. And Zinchenko is a high risk, high reward type of player. Like you have a number 10 playing as your left back. People that are like acting like they didn't know that Zinchenko was not a great defender didn't read the box when we bought the player. Like Jesus and Zinchenko are exactly what was advertised. So I don't know why people are surprised. So you get a lot more possession, and a lot more control in midfield by playing Zinchenko, which is why we score so many goals. But the reason why we give up silly goals at times is because he is back there. So I think Arteta needs to know when to, like change things up. Like usually Zinchenko is done about 65, 70 minutes. Like usually that's when he's done. And so maybe just a natural sub would be to bring in Tierney in those minutes and let him close out the game. Finishers, closers, whatever you want to call it. I do think that they need to come quicker, especially when the game is pretty much done, Lay says, I don't care about the second half performance at this stage of the season. The most important thing was the win. I mean, you could see that there was like in the first 10 minutes of the game, there's a little bit of nervousness. Then once we got the first goal, we kind of calmed down. That performance was very identical to the performances that we've had over the season. Like we get up a couple of goals, maybe we give away a silly one. The same thing happened against Leeds, against Crystal Palace. But for the most part, the game was pretty much done. So Arsenal either need to learn how to be better defensively, which I feel like is would be more my choice, would be to not be giving up those last minute goals or those silly goals where we just switch off, or we need to be able to score more goals. And for a team that's like pushing 90 goals, I'm not sure that I feel like our problem is we need more goals. Like we have to, every single game where we're on top, we have to score 5-6 goals. Like that's not really realistic. I think we need to be more defensively solid and not switch off and play 90 minutes of good defensive, have good defensive play for 90 minutes. I think that is kind of what Arsenal need to be doing. It's, I think some people would just rather us just score more goals, but I think on the balance of things, we probably just need to be better defensively, especially like at home. Scott says, let's not overhype Kiwior. It was against a very poor Chelsea. Newcastle is the test. I mean, it's not even hype. It's just he's better than Holding. And so like I still stand by what I say. I'm standing on it. He was never crap. And so whether he's world class, good, average, whatever, like the idea that people were saying that he was crap and needed a loan or we shouldn't have bought him because he wasn't great against Sporting, that's what I'm saying. Like he was good yesterday, and I don't think it matters who the opposition was, whether we're going to say that or not. Yes, the real test is against Newcastle, but I think based on yesterday's performance, you can at least say that if you said that he was poor and that we needed to loan him out or he was shit, that you were wrong. And so, yeah, like there's nothing wrong with saying that a player that played well. It's not really hyping. It's just telling the truth. Roman says, are you concerned that Arteta takes too long to bring off players who are clearly struggling? Zinchenko against Liverpool, Saka against West Ham, Saka yesterday. Yeah, I think that's what I was kind of talking about, is like the subs need to come quicker. And I think it just shows how like Arteta really just doesn't trust like Tierney, Emile Smith-Rowe. Like these players are just not trusted because Zinchenko you could just tell like he's done 60, 65 minutes. He has to come off. He's done his job, and for the last 30 minutes, you play Tierney because like he came on and he shut down that side, and he did. Like we really didn't have that much trouble after that. So I do think he needs to make that decision. Maybe he doesn't feel confident about the players that he has that can come in on that right-hand side. But like, quite frankly, you just can't leave players out there that are dead on their feet, Dave says, Jess, can anybody please tell me what Tierney has done not to get a start? Well, I don't think he's justified starting. I think he's justified maybe getting more minutes, like at the end of games, like instead of giving him 10 minutes, give him 30, because in those 10 to 15 minutes where Zinchenko is kind of done, that's where we lose games, give up silly goals, and switch off. And so, yeah, I think Tierney has more than, like, he should be getting more minutes. But do I think he deserves starting? Not necessarily. I think people have over-indexed this whole, like, Zinchenko's so bad, defensively, that Tierney should be starting, where they don't realize that, like, we don't score the amount of goals that we score. We don't have that same level of domination in most games if Zinchenko's not out there. So, for me, like, Tierney doesn't deserve to start. Should he be getting some more minutes, especially at the end of games? Absolutely. But it's clear that he's not trusted. High Tech J says, funny enough, I'm super apathetic about this win. It feels meaningless at the moment, but if City collapse, then this game will mean a lot more in hindsight. Yeah, I mean, we just have to stay close. I understand, like, this feeling, this win is nowhere near like the levels of like what we were feeling earlier on in the season, when it felt like these were the steps that we're taking to win the league. Do you know what I mean? But a win is a win. A win is a win. Morgan says Newcastle is going to punish us if we switch off like we did in the second half. Well, we tend to do the same things where we switch off when we're up 2 or 3 goals early, and I don't really anticipate us doing that. I think when the game is closer, we tend to be a lot more switched on for some reason, but yeah, like the second half wasn't as scintillating as the first half, but like, it's not like Chelsea were cutting us open. It wasn't like they really had that many chances. It was just more like we switched off in that one moment. Arteta could have made that substitution earlier, but like the game was won, you guys, and like game state has to come in. Like, people are really over indexing that second half. Like, the game was done, Caro says, I would not start Zinni against Newcastle. The guy refuses to defend. I mean, he's just a number 10 playing in our left back position. Like, I don't know why people are acting brand new, but again, like, you lose something if you don't have Zinchenko. I think, yes, maybe you do play Tierney just to make sure that we're more playing like more traditionally, like, because obviously if you move Zinchenko into that position, especially if Gabriel's not 100%, I think maybe he might need some help, so don't leave him by himself if Gabriel's not 100%, if that makes sense. And so maybe you do want to make that decision. But I've noticed that like lately, last couple of games, there's been like a heavy emphasis on like really like beating down Zinchenko, on being like this terrible defender and this player that we just cannot play with next season at all. And, I've seen lineups for next season that don't include Jesus and Zinchenko. If we don't buy those 2 players, we are nowhere near the title. Nowhere near it. They're not enough. That's the truth. Like, the team, like, they're not enough to get us the title. We need more players. We need to upgrade. We need more quality. We need more depth. We need more experience, period. But like, this whole like thing where like people have really just decided like Zinchenko just can never play for us again. I just find it to be like very fickle and like annoying, because if he wasn't there, we wouldn't be playing this way. Like, it's weird. Lay says, Kiwior is not only better than Holding, he actually has a decent right leg. Yeah, it's just one of those things where it's like, it's just so obvious. So I know people are like, don't gas Kiwior, don't gas Kiwior, because I know what it comes from is like, people had really bought into the idea that like Arteta didn't have any choices but to play Holding. He did. And it doesn't mean that like Arteta is a terrible manager or anything like that. He just didn't make the right decision. Like, he should have made sure with everything and every fiber in his being that we did not have Holding playing in the important games of the season. And so people want, oh, well, Kiwior, maybe he's not that good. Like, maybe we shouldn't gas him. He's better than Holding. So, like, whether you want to gas him or not, that's not really important. Like, he's better than Holding, and he probably should have been playing. That playing Kiwior is a good thing, but it also kind of backfired in a way. Because I still don't think if Holding had played against Chelsea, like, we wouldn't have been sitting at the halfway line. We would have been backing up, like, come on. It's not like Southampton and West Ham were that good either. Do you know what I mean? Technovic says, main difference with Kiwior is how we have our compactness and calmness back, as he is clearly trusted by those around him. Bingo. Bingo, bingo, bingo. Lucas says that game gives me zero confidence for Newcastle, by the way, especially with Big Gab not at 100%. At this point, just want us to finish the season on a high in the last 2 home games. I mean, it wouldn't give you confidence because Newcastle are completely different. But I do think you can at least take away from that game that the boys will be up for it. I think that was the main thing that I was looking for, is like I wanted to see signs of life. I don't expect us to go to St. James and just like wipe Newcastle off. Like, they're playing with complete freedom. They're playing as good as they possibly can. And we're a little bit below that. Like, we're not playing at our absolute best, So I understand, but at least we see signs of life. That's important to me. We have to finish the season on a high. The football giant says Kiwior was really good yesterday in a position he is less suited to play. Saroon says, should Jorginho start in place of Partey against Newcastle? That's a very big decision to make from Mikel Arteta. I do think that Partey has been pretty diabolical in the last 4 games. And when he played yesterday, he came right out there, lost the ball, fouled a couple of times. His head's just not there. His head's just not there. And so you have to make the decision whether or not, a subpar Partey that in theory would be a better option against a physical athletic midfield. Like, would you choose that over Jorginho, who we know athletically cannot keep up with Joe Linton and Bruno Guimaraes, but, looks more up for it at this point, like looks like somebody that is turned on, like ready to play. It's a difficult decision to make, but sometimes I do think you have to go with form and look at somebody and say, Partey, for me, if he's not at 100%, he's almost like a 0, because he loses his physicality when he's not at 100%, and he loses his mind. And so right now, mentally, physically, he's not at it. And so I'm not 100% convinced that he's naturally in this state a better option than Jorginho. But that's a decision that Mikel Arteta needs to make. Because I'm also just not a big fan of Jorginho, Xhaka, Zinchenko against a transition team. I think it'll be quite similar to how Sporting was, but more deadly, because Sporting or Newcastle have better attackers, So it's a tough one, but I don't have any confidence in Thomas Partey going into the game against Newcastle, because when he's not there, if that makes sense. Scott says, I agree with your Zinchenko KT opinions, but against Newcastle, he should start because of what Newcastle can do to that side. I mean, I agree. Like, I think if I saw Tierney start, I would feel like that makes sense to me. I just think in normal games, like where like yesterday, you need like Zinchenko to play, and I'm finding some of the revisionism around him to be a little bit, it grates on me, because I do think that we tend to like live in misery. And when we're not really good with the player, or we feel like he's making mistakes, we throw them in the trash and act like they're just like the worst thing in the world. And I can kind of see that it's happening with Zinchenko. It was happening with Jesus, and it's inevitably going to happen with Saka as well. But yeah, if he started against Newcastle, Kieran Tierney, I wouldn't like mind it. Let's see. SM says our fan base needs to have punching bag. It's Zinchenko's turn at the moment. It's so annoying. I mean, we just don't really have like a grasp on like balance at all. It's like you either love a player to the point where we can't live without them, or we hate them so much that they should be sold, and I don't really feel like on the basis of the season, what we've seen, how we played, that anybody that was like a part of that starting 11, except for maybe some players in the midfield, are just like, they have to go. Like, I just don't understand that, but a couple of big content creators tell people that this player is useless, and all of a sudden everybody starts saying it. And yeah, it's annoying. T1 says, now is a time to add what you have not subtract. Rice and Caicedo is a start. We do need new midfielders, Jordan Hill says, hello, good morning. Did you give your thoughts on Chelsea match already for both teams? I didn't really talk about Chelsea. Like, I've been talking about Arsenal mostly because it's an Arsenal channel, but this is exactly what Chelsea deserve. I mean, on the football terrace yesterday, what I was saying was that, like, I've seen a lot of Chelsea fans like really piping up in these last couple of weeks since we've been playing poorly about how they're going to finish above us next season. And I just feel like it takes more than just spending money. Like, the manager has to work with the players. They have to learn the system. They have to learn how to play with each other, and that takes time. And so from an Arsenal perspective, I'm more looking at how can we catch City rather than how can we keep teams that are like 40 points behind us, like away from us. Like that's just not what I'm focused on. But Chelsea have a lot of quality in that team, but they're too arrogant to fight at this point because they feel like it's above them and they're torturing their fans. But it's no more than that group deserve because they're one of the worst fan bases, to be honest. Lucas says our starting 11 was unbeatable. Depth and Partey injuries are the problem, not Jesus and Zinchenko. Our complex says Zinchenko worked while we had Saliba and when Partey was on form, but when they weren't there to stabilize the defense, then Zinchenko fell apart. I don't think Tierney is that good and injury prone. I mean, yeah, I think but the entire team over the last couple of games has been poor, right? Like we have to like be for real. Like even though Zinchenko hasn't been great, can we actually say that like against West Ham and Southampton, like Tierney played against West Ham. Like it wasn't Zinchenko. Again, at Anfield, I think the biggest thing was that Zinchenko got nutmegged like by Trent. And so that whole game became his fault, but it wasn't. It was either Xhaka's fault or Zinchenko's fault, but it wasn't wholly either of their faults. Like there were a lot of different players that you could look at and say, well, that wasn't great. That wasn't great. That wasn't great. West Ham, he didn't play. Against Southampton, he was definitely dodgy, but also like Ramsdale decided to just like give them a goal in like the first couple of seconds of the game. So it's a hard one for me to look at Zinchenko and say like it's you because like Saliba's not there and this and that. Like a lot of players have been playing under their level for the last 4 games, and I just think he's an easy punching bag. He hasn't been great, but like nobody has, you know what I mean? The only players that I do feel like come into less scrutiny in these last couple of games are the attackers, and that's because they've scored enough goals to win the games, but the midfield and the defense have kind of fallen apart. Let's see. Afsar says, Jess, do you think Arsenal should play 3 at the back with Kiwior, Holding, and Gab at Newcastle? I would actually say that like I would do everything in my power not to play Rob Holding against Newcastle. I just don't see why it would, like, why at this point, after you've seen Kiwior, if Gabriel can start, play Tierney, and then play them like a back 3, but it doesn't have to be a traditional back 3, if that makes sense. Like, just build up in a back 3, defend in a 5, like, just try to plug gaps where there's gaps, like, you know what I mean? But like I would play Tierney, Gabriel, and Kiwior and just have them sit in a 3 back there. Tierney not really bombing forward or going into midfield, but just kind of like staying near Gabriel, and White kind of like supporting Saka on that right-hand side. We know Saka's going to play, so whatever, you know, that's what I would do. I would do everything in my power not to play Rob Holding against Newcastle. But if we have to, like, you could do that. But like, I think the main thing is just not to do the obvious thing that's going to get exploited. If I think the obvious thing would be to play in like more of a traditional setup at the back in a back 4, be more sturdy, be more solidified, and then make sure the spacing in midfield is good. Defend first. Don't try to win the game in the first couple of minutes and get caught on the break. Be smart, manage the game well. I think also like mindset and players that have a cool, calm head are going to be really important against Newcastle. And I think that has to come into play. I think Holding doesn't inspire confidence in the rest of the team, so he should be avoided. Tierney's played in big games, so maybe he would be somebody that you want to play cool, calm, collected, will stay in his position, doesn't necessarily need to go forward, just kind of stay near Gabriel. And maybe you could consider Jorginho because he's a cool, calm head, and Trossard because he seems to be somebody that's level-headed as well. I think playing players that are not going to lose their heads as well is important. Demore says, if Gabriel is out against Newcastle, will you prefer Partey and Kiwior partnership in CB against Holding and Kiwior? No, I mean, if Gabriel is out, then, I mean, I don't know. I would, Partey is not somebody I'd want moving into the back line in the condition that he's in right now. So you have to figure out something else, but I'm hoping that Gabriel is fit. That's what I'm hoping first. Like, that's my first and foremost. Gabriel be fit. If he's not fit, then we figure it out from there. But, moving Partey in that back line for me, I don't know. The Sheikh says issue is just Zinchenko is more of a midfielder than a defender. We look more solid defensively with Tierney. I mean, but that's the truth. But at the same time, you are going to lose something if you have Tierney in the team. So if you're willing to lose some of your possession and the dominant aspects that you have in midfield with Zinchenko, then that's fine. But like, we know that Zinchenko is literally a midfielder playing at left back. He's no different than Trent Alexander-Arnold, in my opinion. He just plays on the other side. So that you have to compensate for that, but it's high risk, high reward. When those players are performing for you, it's hard to stop them. And that's why we've been so good. So yeah, like to me, that's obvious. He's more of a midfielder because he just literally is. He's playing in that position, and we basically play with two at the back. Right now, we don't have maybe the right midfield, situation, and at the back we can't squeeze the space because there's no Saliba. So maybe you do make the change, but again, like, it's not about Zinchenko being a shit player, which is what I really push back against. It's just the way that we play, high risk, high reward, and maybe Arteta needs to make some changes, but that's not really Zinchenko's fault. You know what I mean? Darren says one of the worst fan bases coming from an Arsenal fan, the most toxic fans in the country. Well, I mean, these are my people, so Arsenal fans, those are my people. So they're my toxic fan base. That's my toxic family. But as far as like when I'm looking out and I'm thinking about a fan base that I don't like, that is kind of annoying and spoiled and is always crying about something, it's Chelsea, so, I'll love my toxic fan base and my family. You can talk about them if you want, but I'm going to love on them. I don't care. These are my people. So there you go. If you don't like it, oh well. Technobig says Arsenal defensive line height versus Leeds, 43.8 meters. Arsenal defensive line versus Chelsea, 50.3 meters. So what does that mean? What are you trying to say with that? Lucas says, would you take Conte on a free if we were signing 3 midfielders and one needed to be cheaper? No, like, not really. I think that's like, what, 10 years too late? No, I wouldn't. Unless something like weird happened and, Xhaka or Partey were not here next season or something, then maybe you take one on a free to make sure you have, a senior midfielder in there. But no, I don't think we need to be doing that. Umar says Caicedo in this Arsenal team would ball. Yeah, he'd be really good for us too. Scott says Saliba is like Rio, unbelievable reading of the game for his age. The way he brings the ball to the back, pings it to the left. Saliba is just, he's an excellent player, and it's hard to replace him in the team. And we've learned our lesson, really. We should have learned it last season, but we learned it, is that like, and this is why like links to Mark Gahey for me are like the types of links that I want to see. I know people, maybe don't feel like center back is a big deal, but it is. I think we've learned that every single season where we have a drop off from the starter to the backup, that's where the season is lost. It wasn't lost when Jesus wasn't playing. It wasn't really lost when Thomas Partey wasn't playing. It was lost when Saliba went off, so I think, and making sure like Kiwior is kind of like our project center back where, he's a little bit younger. He's going to need some more time. If he gets more playing time, it'll probably go faster. But, the player that you bring in to back up Saliba cannot be like another project. And so we've been linked to that Joseph Sutalo guy. And like, although he looks great, he's a project. He hasn't played in this league. He's so similar to Kiwior. Bring in somebody ready to go and make sure that we don't live through this again. Like, this is a nightmare. I don't want to live through it again. I'm looking at the defensive options and I'm like, damn, we don't have any real options. And it would be so nice to see somebody that's already been there and done that in the league, at least, be able to step in. It's just, it's so strange that we've done this again. Jordan Hill says, would you take St. Maximum as a new signing in the summer? No, definitely not. Maxwell says, "Toxic Max, what's up, Jess?" That's the thing. It's like, if somebody asks me who's like the worst fan base, like I'm not going to say Arsenal because those are my people. If you guys are toxic, be toxic. If you guys are annoying, be annoying. I don't care, But like, if I'm looking out there and I'm like, who's the most annoying fan base? It's not going to be my people. It's going to be some of their people, So nobody likes Chelsea fans. Let's be for real. Oregon says, "What's your opinion on us signing Rice and Gahey?" Bring. You guys know I'm down with the Rice signing. And Gahey, I'm down with that as well. I think we need to invest in that position. I don't think we should chintz out and get like somebody for 15 million. That's a project. We don't need that. Like, we need somebody that's ready to step in. I think 2 midfielders of real quality and a quality center back is a really good start. And then if we can address the attack, which I think we should, then you look at that as well. But like, that center back has got to come in, and if he's English, then you can move on from Holding without feeling any type of way, it's really no offense to Holding, but I just feel like, when people were yelling at me, telling me that he was fine and he wasn't a problem, it really annoyed me because it was just like, what are you smoking? Ash says it's promising. We're after 2 midfielders and a center back this summer. We've recognized our weak spots. Probably like this run-in has shown, because I've seen like a switch from like maybe not looking at a right back anymore and looking at a center back instead. Maybe like the feeling is that like that's more important, because really like the drop off from Saliba to Holding is way more vast than White to Tomiyasu. And I know that there is a gap in quality there, but like it's nowhere near. We could have survived. We actually needed Tomiyasu in these games, but you could survive with Tomiyasu. You really can, especially if he's fit. So yeah, it's so interesting, but this summer is going to be great. Prime Henri says, Tony, Rice, Gahey sorts out a soft spine. Kid Simmons really impressed me when we played PSV. The thing about Tony is that like we've never been credibly linked to him, and also like this lengthy ban that he's gonna have. As soon as he signs for Arsenal, he'll get the lengthiest ban possible, so he'll get the 6 months. So I don't know if you really want to sign somebody that's not going to be available to you until like, later down the line. I'm not sure about that. And I've never seen us credibly linked to him. I think Paul Merson was the person that said that we should bring him in. And then now a lot of Arsenal fans are talking about it as if it's been linked. Maybe he is somebody on the list, and we just don't know about it, because obviously links don't necessarily mean that you'll move on a player, and no links don't mean that you're not interested in a player. But I don't know how I feel about it. I just don't know if we're actually really linked with him at all. Ash says Gahey, Saliba, Gabriel, Kiwior, White, Tommy. Now that is a great backline selection. I think so. I just, because people are talking about like we need a different option than Zinchenko, and I do feel like if you cast your mind back to like when we played against Liverpool at the Emirates, Arteta went for Tierney and Zinchenko were both fit, but he went for Tomiyasu in that left back position, and he shut down Mohamed Salah. And I think that is the option that Arteta would have used had he had the choice at this point, which also furthers my feeling that Kieran Tierney will not be here next season. But that group, when you're starting to build like a real backline, group there. Jean-Rene says, loved yesterday. Chelsea can officially stay quiet when talking about Arsenal. They have nothing to say to us this season. Exactly. I don't know why they were talking. It was weird. Scott says, Saliba out, no clean sheets, gutting, but we on the rise. I mean, the thing about the Newcastle game is it could end up being a shootout. The problem is that Newcastle are good defensively, but their problem is that like when they played us at the Emirates, it was hard for them to defend the way that they wanted to, because Eddie Howe has moved his lineup, and those guys that he plays are very slow and big. Like they're kind of like these big kind of like, kind of guys. And so they can get caught out. And so when he played against us, they played in like that low block, really doubled up on our wingers. And, so if they do try to play like a higher line and, they don't really have numbers on our wingers, and they allow us a little bit more freedom because they're at home and they feel like they need to have the impetus. I do think we can score against them. Like, as good as their defense is, a lot of that comes from the fact that they don't open up as much, but we can score. We know that goal scoring is not our issue. It's about keeping the goals out. And that's kind of like my worry a little bit. It's just like, we don't have a solid back line. If we were going into that game with Kiwior, Gabriel for sure, then I would just say put in Tierney and just like, let's just go from there. He has to make a decision on Thomas Partey, Jorginho, but we have a chance. It's just going to be like really difficult because of the way that they play doesn't suit the way that we play. It's very much like a counterbalance, if that makes sense. The way that they play, because they have all these ball progressors and they want to dribble, and it's hard. It's hard to keep them pinned in. C. Wilder says, people in the watch along were saying Potter saved Chelsea from relegation. It's true. Without his points, they'd be getting relegated. Saksham says, Arsenal also linked to that Ajax guy that plays right center back, right back, left back. Wrench, I think his name is. I think that's who you're talking about. Yeah, like, I mean, I wouldn't mind us still getting a right back, but I just think center back, 2 midfielders, and then beyond that, we'll see. We'll probably still need some sales, but I think we'll get them. So we'll see what happens. Scott says, would you play Trossard against Newcastle? Absolutely. I think he deserves a start. I think he's a cool, calm head amongst players that can be a little in a big game. And so, yeah, I think he's more than earned a starting position from here. It's just a matter of if Arteta is brave enough to drop Saka, because he's obviously the player that would probably be the dropped. I think dropping Martinelli is harsh considering the form that he's in. So we'll see. Nashville says, can't play J20 and Xhaka together against Newcastle's midfield. They would get run at circles around. Yeah. The harsh thing about that, though, is like, in the state that Thomas Partey is in right now, do you actually think that he's not going to get run over and ran circles around? I mean, he looked so bad yesterday too, so I'm sure he'll come back in, but he needs to get his mind right. This is 5 games into the run-in, and you are our most senior player, one of our like most important players, and you drop like zeros in every single game, so it's just like, I agree with you. Putting that midfield out there like would be really tough. I do think that. But I also think I would like Arteta to be brave and do something like play J20 and Partey in a double pivot. Give us more security in front of our back line and allow Thomas Partey to kind of be our ball progressor and go forward, and let J20 sit at the base. But we haven't tried anything, and he's so wedded to the players that he loves, like Xhaka and Saka. These guys they're never not in the lineup. So even when tactical flexibility is probably the reason why you'd make these changes, I don't think he'd do them because he's so loyal to them. And so it's just like, even like, if you mention like not playing Saka, people are like, well, you think you should drop him? I just think that sometimes you just have to rotate, shift things around for the betterment of the game, not necessarily because we need to be protecting anybody's feelings. But yeah, it's going to be a tough game for sure. Hightower says zeros is a bit harsh. I thought he was poor against Liverpool. I thought he was really culpable in the West Ham game. I thought he was non-existent and pretty poor against Southampton, and he was awful against Man City. So maybe not zeros, but it definitely wasn't anything above a 5, so there you go. And the thing is I have way higher expectations of him than I have most people, but I do have to go, you guys, because I have to get to the airport. But like I said, I'll be out of town. If something miraculous, because, okay, I'll be coming back from Vegas when the game is like kind of starting, the Newcastle game is starting. So depending on what happens, I may or may not be able to do like a match reaction, but I will try. But make sure you guys like this video, subscribe to the channel. Love you guys so much. Love you guys way more than Chelsea fans because they're shit. So yeah, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye guys. Love you.